Oceans cover more than two-thirds of Earth, yet their deepest places remain more mysterious than the surface of the moon. Now, far below the Indian Ocean, scientists have uncovered something extraordinary.
7 kilometers below the surface of the Indian Ocean, where pressure can collapse steel and sunlight has never reached, a team of scientists sat frozen inside their submersible as bones filled their screens.
A vast underwater graveyard where giants of the sea appear to have been gathering for thousands of years. Watch this fascinating discovery of a massive graveyard of whales.
The bones stretched into the darkness far beyond the reach of their lights. They had gone down searching for something else entirely. What they were looking at had been lying on that dark seafloor, unseen, for over 5 million years. The paper that stopped scientists mid-sentence. On June 10, 2026, a study landed in the journal Nature that stopped marine scientists cold. The paper, led by Xiaotong Peng of the Chinese Academy of Sciences Institute of Deep Sea Science and Engineering, described something the scientific world had never encountered before. Deep in the southeastern Indian Ocean, researchers had found the largest, deepest, and oldest whale graveyard ever recorded on Earth, sitting silently on the ocean floor, completely unknown to science until a few years ago. This graveyard stretches for approximately 1,200 kilometers along the ocean floor. That is roughly the distance from London to Warsaw. And across the tiny fraction of that space the team actually managed to survey, they found 476 fossilized whale remains, plus 5 individual whales that had died so recently that their bones were still feeding entire living communities of deep-sea creatures. The density of whale remains in the surveyed area reached 759 individuals per square kilometer, far higher than anything previously documented anywhere on Earth. Researchers estimated that across the full extent of the trench, there could be more than 10 million whale carcasses resting on the ocean floor right now. 10 million carcasses is a number that is almost impossible to hold in your mind. And here is the part that really gets under your skin. The oldest bones in this graveyard have been dated to approximately 5.3 million years ago. Whales have been dying in this exact location since before our earliest known ancestors were walking upright on land. And nobody on the surface of the Earth had any idea it was happening. Co-author Peng Zhou, a marine geologist who personally descended into the trench on multiple dives, described the experience as profoundly special. He told reporters his team was staring at the final resting place of millions of whales, a deep-time archive of evolution and deep-sea life, and called it humbling and awe-inspiring. If you try to picture what it would feel like to float in a small metal vessel 7 kilometers below the surface, surrounded by bones that predate the entire human species, you start to understand why this discovery hit the scientific community the way it did. What makes the discovery even more striking is not just what the scientists found, but how long it had been sitting there undisturbed. This was not a recent geological event. This was not the result of a single catastrophe. This was a slow, continuous accumulation building in the dark for longer than the entire history of the human species, in a trench that oceanographers had known about for decades but had never thought to closely examine from below. Before we go deeper into what this graveyard contains, you need to understand exactly how it was found, because the story of the discovery reveals something deeply unsettling about how little we actually know about the planet we live on. The accident that opened a 5 million-year archive. In early February 2023, a Chinese research vessel called the Tan Suo Yihao was crossing the southeastern Indian Ocean on what was planned as a routine scientific mission. The team on board was searching for hydrothermal fluid activity in the Hadal Zone, the name given to the deepest parts of the ocean, where pressure becomes almost incomprehensible and sunlight never reaches. Nobody was looking for whale bones. Nobody had any reason to be. To reach those depths, the team deployed the Fendushi, a human-occupied submersible whose name translates to striver in English and which had previously reached the bottom of Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench in November 2020, touching a depth of 10,909 meters. This was not an experimental vehicle. It was one of the most capable deep-sea research submarines ever built. What happened on dive FDZ-159 was entirely unplanned. As the submersible moved along the seafloor at approximately 7,000 meters depth, the crew noticed strange, solid-looking lumps scattered across the sediment. They did not match any rock formation the team recognized. They did not fit any known geological feature. The manipulator arm was deployed to collect samples. The objects went into the geological basket. The submarine surfaced. The team carried the samples into the ship's laboratory. When the lab examination began, the truth became clear. Xiaotong Peng described the moment to reporters by saying that when they got back to the laboratory, they found that what they were holding were whale fossils. That quiet and understated description of a 5-million-year-old whale bone being identified on a ship's lab bench in the middle of the Indian Ocean is one of the most remarkable scientific moments of this decade. The team had gone looking for hydrothermal springs. They had accidentally found a necropolis. Peng told the press that discovering a graveyard of this scale was completely unexpected, and that the size of distribution, the depth, and the age range were far beyond anything they had imagined. Co-author Peng Zhou described witnessing the graveyard through the submersible's viewport as a truly incredible experience, and said the vibrant ecosystems the team observed offered a completely different perspective on what they had assumed was a dark and lifeless ocean floor. His words are worth sitting with, because they describe the exact moment a scientist confronts the gap between what we assume the deep ocean is and what it actually turns out to be. What followed was 32 more dives along the trench, surveying a combined area roughly the size of a single urban neighborhood. In that small slice of a 1,200-kilometer trench, the team found 476 fossilized whale remains and 5 active whale fall communities, all in a place no human being had ever closely examined before. And that is the part of this story that should genuinely sit with you. The Diamantina Fracture Zone had been on oceanographic maps for decades. Ships had crossed above it. Scientists knew roughly where it was, but nobody had ever sent a vehicle down to carefully examine its seafloor. For 5 million years, while human civilization rose and fell and rose again on the surface above, this graveyard simply sat there in the dark, accumulating bones, growing larger and completely unknown. The physical structure of the trench itself is the reason it became this kind of archive. And once you understand the geology of this place, the scale of what has been happening down there becomes even more remarkable. The trench that the ocean uses as a funnel. The Diamantina Fracture Zone is a geological scar in the southeastern Indian Ocean, running approximately 1,200 kilometers parallel to the southeast Indian Ridge, and sitting more than 1,000 kilometers west-southwest of Perth, off the southwestern coast of Australia. It formed tens of millions of years ago as the Australian and Antarctic tectonic plates separated and drifted apart, leaving behind a long, narrow groove carved deep into the ocean floor. Its deepest point, in a section researchers call the Dordrecht Deep, was measured by the Fendouzja at 7,079 meters. To put that in perspective, if you dropped Mount Everest into the Dordrecht Deep, its summit would still sit more than a kilometer below the ocean surface. You are dealing with a place of almost unimaginable depth, sitting in one of the most remote stretches of open ocean on the planet. But the depth alone is not what makes this trench remarkable as a fossil archive. The critical factor is shape. The Diamantina Zone has a pronounced V-shaped cross-section, with steep walls rising sharply on either side of a narrow floor. That V-shape does something very specific to the physics of water and organic material moving above it. When a whale dies anywhere in the broad stretch of southern Indian Ocean above this trench, its carcass enters a system of surface and deep water currents that, combined with the trench's geometry, gradually funnels it toward the lowest point. Researcher Xiaotong Peng explained that the bottom currents flowing through the trench can concentrate those carcasses and transport them down to the trench floor. Think of it like a drain. For 5 million years, the Diamantina Zone has been acting as the ocean's drain for dead whales, and it has never once stopped. Nick Pyenson, curator of fossil marine mammals at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History, described this dynamic as analogous to terrestrial tar pits and natural caves that collect and preserve organic material over long periods of time. He compared the site to the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles, where ancient animals were passively gathered not through any intent on their part, but simply because the physics of the location made accumulation inevitable. The Diamantina Zone, Pyenson said, is doing exactly that at oceanic scale and across 5 million years. There is also the question of sedimentation. In most parts of the ocean, particles settle on the seafloor fast enough to eventually bury whatever rests there. In the Diamantina Zone, the measured sedimentation rate is between 0.05 and 0.55 centimeters per 1,000 years. That is so slow it is nearly zero. A whale bone that fell to this seafloor 5 million years ago has been sitting on or near the surface of the sediment in cold, stable darkness for the entire span of human prehistory, slowly interacting with the water chemistry around it. Nothing has buried it. Nothing has shifted it. It has simply been there, sitting in the dark, waiting. John Copley, a marine ecologist at the University of Southampton, pointed out something that cuts to the heart of what this discovery represents. Sites like this cannot be detected remotely, the way underwater hot springs can be spotted by instruments from a distance. You have to actually send a vehicle down and look. And because the deep ocean is so vast and so expensive to properly explore, most of it has simply never been examined at that level of detail. The Diamantina Zone sat completely overlooked for the entire length of recorded scientific history. Not because it was concealing itself, but because nobody had ever made the effort to look. And what the chemistry of this trench does to the bones of every animal that lands on its floor is one of the most astonishing parts of the entire discovery. How the ocean turned dead bones into a library. The way these whale bones survived for 5 million years is not the fossilization process you read about in textbooks. These bones were not buried under layers of sediment and slowly compressed into rock over geological time. Instead, they sat exposed on the sea floor and were gradually encased from the outside by a mineral process unique to the deep ocean environment. As the bones rested in contact with deep-sea water over thousands and then millions of years, dissolved minerals in the water column, primarily ferromanganese oxides, gradually formed a crust on and inside the bone surfaces. This crust thickened over time, eventually sealing each bone inside its own natural protective shell. Stephen Godfrey described the effect plainly by saying that the mineral encrustation seals the specimen in so that it will last in perpetuity, or at least over 5 million years. Lead author Xiaotong Peng summarized the full preservation mechanism in an interview by explaining that it is really a combination of bone density, slow burial, and mineral coatings that has allowed these bones to escape being eaten for over 5 million years. That phrase, bone density, points to the other crucial piece of this puzzle. The majority of the fossils recovered here are not vertebrae or ribs. They are the rostra, the elongated beaked snouts of beaked whales. And beaked whale rostra are extraordinary structures, among the densest bones of any living vertebrate, sometimes described as hyperdense, almost like bone armor. They are physically resistant to the bone-eating worms and microbes that normally dissolve a carcass on the seafloor within decades. They survive long enough for ferromanganese crusts to lock them in place, and they carry the chemical signatures that allow scientists to determine how old they are. The research team confirmed the ages of their specimens using strontium isotope analysis, a technique that works by comparing the ratio of two forms of strontium preserved in the bone mineral against the known chemistry of ancient seawater at different points in geological history. Of the 43 fossils recovered and sent for laboratory analysis, 33 yielded successful dates. The results showed a spread from 0.12 million years to 5.26 million years, with no significant break in the sequence. That continuity matters enormously. It tells you the graveyard was not formed in a single catastrophic event and then abandoned. It has been accumulating, one whale at a time, in an unbroken record covering the entire Pliocene and Pleistocene epochs right up to the present day. Among the identified species was Pterocetus bengueli, an extinct beaked whale whose genus had only previously been described from specimens trawled off the coast of South Africa. And then the team found something that made paleontologists genuinely catch their breath. A completely new and previously unknown extinct species, formerly named Pterocetus diamantine, described from a partial skull and rostrum now deposited at the Hadal Museum at the Chinese Academy of Sciences in Sanya. Co-author Giovanni Bianucci of the University of Pisa described the new species as improving the scientific understanding of beaked whale evolutionary history. He added, almost as a footnote, that it was certainly a fortunate discovery, but that many more fossil-beaked whales almost certainly remain on the seafloor of the Diamantina necropolis. That last sentence deserves your full attention. The team surveyed less than 1 square kilometer. The full trench floor covers approximately 14,400 square kilometers. If even a fraction of the remaining space holds the same density of fossils, there could be hundreds of thousands of specimens still down there, many belonging to species that science has never described. They are sitting in the dark right now, coated in mineral crusts, perfectly preserved, completely unknown, and waiting for someone to come and find them. But the fossils are only part of what makes this place unlike anywhere else on Earth, because this graveyard is not simply a resting place for the dead, the city that grows on the bodies of giants. When a whale dies at sea, its body becomes one of the single largest inputs of organic energy that the deep sea floor ever receives in one place at one time. Scientists call these sites whale falls, and a single whale carcass can sustain an entire community of deep-sea creatures for decades. The whale itself disappears. The city it creates remains long after. 5 of the whale remains found in the Diamantina zone were not fossils. They were carcasses recent enough that their bones were still at the center of living, thriving ecosystems. Across these 5 sites, the research team documented 35 species of macrofauna, the larger visible invertebrates that can be counted and identified during a submersible dive. Among them were bone-boring worms of the genus Osedax, sometimes called zombie worms, which drill into whalebone using root-like structures and digest the lipids stored inside. There were chemosynthesis-based bivalves, clams that harbor sulfur-oxidizing bacteria in their tissues and derive energy not from sunlight, but from the chemical compounds released as whalebone slowly breaks down. There were brittle stars, stalked sea anemones, pedunculate sponges, sea stars, and tube worms whose species the researchers are still working to formally identify and name. Peng Zhou told reporters that the vibrant ecosystems he witnessed on these whale falls offered a completely different perspective on what everyone assumed was a dark and lifeless ocean floor. That is a carefully restrained way of describing what the images from the submersible actually show. A skeleton covered in worms and clams and stars, dense with life, pulsing in absolute darkness, 7 kilometers below the surface of the planet. One single carcass, identified through DNA analysis as an Antarctic minke whale, hosted 26 invertebrate species on its skeleton alone. A section of that carcass covering under 11 square feet contained 2,840 individual deep-sea animals packed together in total darkness. Take a moment to sit with that image. A whale that died alone, 7 kilometers below the surface, in a place no human being had ever visited, has become a thriving community. The larger the carcass, the longer the city it builds can survive. The team also recorded the deepest ever observation of a sea daisy, a small disc-shaped invertebrate of the genus Xyloplax, which had never before been found on a whale fall anywhere. Of the 21 organisms sent for molecular sequencing, only 1 could be confirmed as a species already known to science. The rest are almost certainly new to science entirely. Their formal descriptions not yet written, their very existence only just discovered by a team that found them entirely by accident. Craig Smith, the oceanographer at the University of Hawaii who discovered the very first whale fall on record back in 1987, called the Diamantina finds of major importance to understanding whale evolution and whale distributions over geologic time, and described it as the largest accumulation of fossil whale remains in the deep sea of which he was aware. That statement carries real weight, coming from the person who spent decades building the entire field of whale fall science from the ground up. The deepest active whale fall community previously known to science was found at 4,204 meters. The deepest active community found in the Diamantina zone sits at approximately 6,789 meters, extending the known depth limit of these living ecosystems by over 2,500 meters. Everything scientists thought they understood about how deep these communities could survive was significantly underestimating reality. But none of this explains why so many whales ended up here in the first place, and what has been drawing them to this exact location for 5 million years without a single interruption. Why millions of whales keep coming here to die. Scientists are honest about the fact that they do not yet have a complete answer to this question. But the leading explanations, taken together, describe a place that is almost uniquely designed by geology, oceanography, and animal behavior to accumulate the dead across geological time. The first factor is migration. The Diamantina zone sits within a corridor used by multiple species of baleen whales, including Antarctic minke whales and sei whales, which travel through this part of the Indian Ocean following seasonal food availability. These animals die of natural causes throughout their range at sea, and when they do in this region, their carcasses enter a system of currents that the trench's V-shaped geometry gradually concentrates downward toward the floor. The physics of the location do most of the work passively and continuously, year after year, across millions of years. The second factor involves the hunting behavior of beaked whales, and this is where things get genuinely uncomfortable to think about. Beaked whales are the deepest diving marine mammals on the planet. The record was set in 2014 by a Cuvier's beaked whale off the coast of California, which descended to approximately 2,992 meters and held its breath for 137.5 minutes. A later study documented a dive lasting 222 minutes. These are animals that hunt squid and fish in near total darkness at depths that would kill a human being in seconds. The Diamantina zone's deep waters hold exactly the kind of rich prey these animals pursue, and researchers observed abundant squid and fish during their submersible dives. But the trench floor begins at over 4,000 meters and drops to 7,000. Beaked whales can physiologically manage dives to around 3,000 meters, but the foraging opportunities in this region may have drawn individual animals progressively deeper, pushing them past the limits of what their lungs and oxygen stores can safely sustain. John Copley, the marine ecologist at the University of Southampton, described the possibility that some of these animals perished perilously close to their limits as they descended into a crack in the ocean floor that goes twice as deep as they can safely follow their prey. They went in hunting, and they never came back up. The third factor is the V-shaped topography, working as a passive collection system. Even a whale that died far from the trench axis does not simply sink straight down and stay where it falls. Carcasses float, drift on surface currents, and travel significant distances before eventually sinking. When they sink within the catchment area above this trench, the bottom currents flowing along the trench walls channel them downward toward the floor. The process is mechanical, impersonal, and it has been running continuously for at least 5 million years. When you hold those three forces together, something important becomes clear. The Diamantina zone accumulated this extraordinary density of whale remains because of a very specific combination of depth, topography, slow sedimentation, and position within a migratory corridor. And researchers already know that this combination of conditions is not entirely unique to one trench in one ocean. Fossil specimens of the same genus Pterocetus have already been trawled from deep water off the South African coast. The margins of the Iberian Peninsula share key geological characteristics. The waters near the Crozet Islands and the Kerguelen Plateau in the southern Indian Ocean sit within core beaked whale habitat. These are not speculative locations. They are places where evidence already suggests that something similar may be happening right now, in the dark, unseen by anyone on the surface above. What scientists found when they set that evidence beside this discovery changes the entire frame of what this graveyard means. What else the ocean has been building in secret? The most quietly significant statement in all the coverage of this study came from Nick P. Ensign of the Smithsonian, who said in an interview that he thought what the team was dealing with was probably not unique. 7 words that open a door onto something enormous. If the Diamantina Zone is not unique, and if the conditions that created it exist in other deep trenches around the world, then what scientists have found is not just the world's largest whale graveyard. They have found the first confirmed example of a category of deep-sea fossil archive that may be scattered across the entire global ocean, hidden in trenches that no submersible has ever visited, quietly accumulating in the dark for millions of years without anyone knowing. Pienson called the Diamantina site a fossil megasite and described it as showing beaked whale ecology over geological time scales, with extinct species overlapping the fossil remains of living species in the same physical space. That is a description of something that has never before been available to science. A continuous, unbroken fossil record of a specific group of living animals spanning 5 million years, still actively forming, with new specimens being added to it right now. To appreciate why that matters as much as it does, consider what we actually know about beaked whales. There are approximately 22 living species. They are among the least understood of all large mammals on Earth because they live in the open ocean, spend most of their time at extreme depth, surface only briefly between dives, and are rarely encountered alive by researchers in the field. Almost everything science currently knows about beaked whale biology and evolutionary history has come from rare strandings when living animals wash onto beaches, or from the occasional carcass recovered at sea. The fossil record for this group is patchy at best, with significant gaps spanning millions of years where the evolutionary story goes completely dark, and scientists simply have no information. The Diamantina Zone fills those gaps. With 33 dated specimens spanning from 0.12 million years to 5.26 million years ago, and likely hundreds of thousands more fossils waiting in the unsurveyed trench floor, researchers now have access to a near-continuous sequence of beaked whale evolutionary history from the early Pliocene to the present day. Stephen Godfrey called it a growing Lagerstätte, using the geological term for an exceptionally preserved fossil deposit, and underlined the crucial difference from every fossil site previously known to science. This one is still being added to. It is a fossil record that the Earth is still actively writing, 7 kilometers below the surface of the ocean. The research team also estimated that across the full extent of the trench floor, 10 million whale carcasses could represent approximately 6.7 million tons of sequestered carbon, equivalent to roughly 4,700 years of the slow organic rain that falls from the surface ocean to the deep sea floor and forms one of the ocean's main natural carbon storage mechanisms. These are model-based estimates that the scientists themselves present with appropriate caution, not final measured counts, but they point to a carbon storage system operating at a scale that has never appeared in any global climate model, and that nobody imagined before this discovery was made. Before February 2023, the Diamantina Fracture Zone was a notation on an oceanographic map. After 32 submersible dives across 6 weeks, it became the most significant whale paleontology site ever found, a living archive of 5 million years of cetacean evolution, and proof that the deep ocean is still actively building things we have absolutely no knowledge of. It was found by a team looking for something completely different, who noticed some strange lumps on a seafloor that no human had ever carefully examined. If one accidental dive into one overlooked trench can reveal 10 million whale carcasses, a completely new species of extinct whale, and an entirely new category of fossil archive that science did not know existed, then the question of what the other unvisited trenches of this world are holding right now in the dark is not a comfortable one to sit with. If this discovery changes the way you think about what might be sitting undiscovered at the bottom of the ocean right now, drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you know someone who still believes we have already found everything worth finding on this planet, send them this video.